resume.
Well, hello, dear listeners and dear viewers, and welcome to another episode of the unseen process of recruiting. What happens after you click submit? Today, I have the pleasure, as usual, of having my co host, Greg. Greg, welcome.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing
Thank you for
well.
having me, as always.
Thanks for
And
doing
thank you
this.
for always letting me bring my friends.
Yes, we have another friend who's joined us today, the fabulous Logan Annsteatt. Logan, who is Senior Recruiter and Account Executive at ACG Resources. Welcome, Logan.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. We're going to have fun today. Why are we going to have fun today? Because we're going to talk about something that I'm going to wager very few people know about. And that is the VMS process of recruiting. VMS. Logan, what does VMS stand for?
So VMS is basically a vendor management system. And it's something that recruiting agencies, recruiting firms will sometimes use depending on the clients they're interacting with to get your profile, your resume in front of the client that you're trying to get a job with.
Okay, hold on. Hold on for a second. You're telling me that when I submit my resume, in addition to dealing with the ATS system, now I, as the applicant, have to think about the VMS aspect of it as well? Another set of initials?
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends on obviously who you're working with from a staffing standpoint, as well as, the client that you're dealing with. They do work in tandem. They're not exactly the same thing. They're supposed to work together. They're supposed to add a lot of, diversity to what you're doing. Really, it's a different way to review talent. You're also able to sometimes, bill and pay talent once they're on with a client, if they're there, on a temp basis or anything like that. And it's a way to update your job descriptions if you are on the client side. But it does add a particular few additional layers if you're a candidate just trying to get your profile in front of somebody.
Okay, Logan. I'm all about diversity, but here's my question. Is the VMS process an internal one, or is it something that I, as an applicant, have to think about as well from my side? Greg, what are your thoughts?
So actually, I was going to flip a question to Logan, because being in staff and recruiting, I am familiar with VMS systems, and we tend to shy away from them on our recruiting model. Is there a specific industry or type of position, Logan, in your experience that you feel VMS is more prevalent in?
So I came from a background that was very heavily focused in IT staffing and engineering. And that is a subset of the staffing industry where if you have multiple roles, say you have a set of development positions, or even if you're trying to come in at an entry level, you're trying to do an IT help desk position. Those are extremely popular roles for this. So it mainly is with organizations that have large structures. They might have multiple locations across the United States or across the world, and they need a better way of, one, using an ATS to keep track of candidates, but two, using this VMS system to keep track of the multiple different vendors they have for each specific location. So for example, you may have a large financial institution hiring a set of IT help desk personnel for multiple locations. And so you would use a VMS system to help you sort through people that you're hiring in New York, in Charlotte, in Florida, in California. It's just another way of obviously making sure that everybody has their T's crossed and their I's dotted. But, like I said, it can add a lot more to the process that is something that you want to check on and want to be aware of if you are a candidate, in my opinion.
Greg, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask Logan. I think there's gonna be a lot of questions for Logan today because I've never really worked on VMS. Um, and now that Logan's been from a VMS side working with us, do you feel that there's a different experience for the job applicant when they're working with a firm that works with VMS versus a firm like ours that's not really VMS oriented?
Absolutely, absolutely. The first big difference is basically the way that things are input and basically the communication line. So, at ACG Resources, very much it's us having a conversation, making sure, the qualifications line up, making sure it's a job that you actually want to go to, and we're sending you over there. Now, that's obviously the end goal of everyone, whether you're working VMS accounts or not. But the stipulations you have to go through when you're working on a VMS account, you have to factor in that you may only have 2 or 3 spots that you can send candidates in. So whereas we're able to send over candidates at kind of an unlimited amount until we find the right person and until our client is satisfied, we may have to pick and choose the best 2 or 3 people if you're working on a VMS side. Also, when you're speaking with someone trying to get their information and you're ready to forward over their resume or their profile, you may have to get additional personal information in order to put them into that VMS system to identify them. We're talking about things like the last 4 of social, their date of birth, month and day, and other personal identifiers that can make people feel kind of uneasy when they're on the phone. So it does feel kind of like a different process, and it does feel a little bit more robotic in the sense that you really are kind of catering to an AI system more than you are to human eyes for that first round of getting somebody's resume looked at.
So you would say more so it's more transactional working with a VMS system than, I guess, our model of recruiting, where it's a little bit more personalized, developing the relationship and things along that such?
Absolutely. I would say when you're working on a VMS centered account, you're not really establishing a relationship with a candidate until you're at least getting into the interviewing stage. Obviously, if you're doing your job as a recruiter, you want to make sure you're having a good rapport. You're understanding your candidate's needs, what their hopes, dreams, and desires are. So you're matching them up with, the right job in the future. But at the end of the day, if you have a set number of people that you need to have into the system, and their resume needs to be formatted just particularly right, sometimes you will decline candidates simply because the resume takes too much time to format. Sometimes there's just not enough time before the mission to get somebody in. So whereas right now, if it takes us a couple of days to find the perfect candidate, that's fine. Sometimes in VMS systems, you need to submit somebody within the first 12 to 24 hours in order for that VMS system to bump your company's candidates up to the top and give them a chance at being viewed, whether they're a 50 or 60% fit versus something better.
Okay, hold on, because you're saying a lot of valuable stuff here. And as a career coach, I want to hone in on a few things, right? You mentioned earlier that if a recruiter is dealing with a VMS company that uses a VMS system, right? 2 or 3 spots that they would have to fill. There's 2 or 3 spots. That means that they have to send resumes that are going to fit those roles. There's not as big of a pool as you would in other circumstances. From a career coaching perspective, that means that that individual should make sure that their resume is in order, and also that it is going to be able to pass the test. Now, here's my question. How does it pass the test? How does a resume get to pass what you were saying in terms of those requirements so that it can go into a VMS system successfully?
So a lot of it is what you guys have talked about on the show before, whereas you're matching things up with what a particular ATS is going to pull and is going to flag for a candidate. Another large piece of it, though, is going to be solely dependent on the recruiter. You're going to have large pieces of VMS systems that have to be entered and are going to be specific to each particular client in each particular role. So for example, there are some VMS systems that, in addition to their ATS system that they use, will ask a set of questionnaire questions to try to qualify a candidate before a hiring manager takes a deeper look at a candidate. So they may ask, do you have this certain certification? Please input the number of years that a candidate has done this certain work or this particular work in a field. And those type of things are going to be holistically unique to each role, and it's going to be dependent on the recruiter to put it in, because the candidate doesn't go into the client-side VMS system. So you have to make sure you're working with, a competent recruiter, somebody that you feel like you can trust, who's giving you, as much transparency as they possibly can, to make sure that your information is going forward, and that you're going to get continuous updates on it. And going back to, what Greg said earlier about some of the main differences on it, you're kind of at the mercy of the system when you're working with VMS recruitment. You may not get updates for a week or two simply because the system doesn't send those out until they're ready for it. So even if, it's been seen by your hiring manager, they're, setting up those interviews for those 2 or 3 people, you may not get that feedback for your candidates until it just comes through that automated email, and you're really just kind of sitting there and doing the best you can with communicating with that for the people you've spoken with.
So from what I'm gathering with the VMS system, it almost basically dehumanizes the process to an extent. It sounds more so our model of recruiting, that where we're actually working with a hiring manager, we have that relationship, we're able to pick up the phone, we're able to email them, gather prompt feedback, and pass that along to the candidate. On when you work in VMS, it's more so seems like you input info into a system and someone on the other side is just clicking yes or no, and that's basically it for the most part. So I guess in the way it kind of rolls down across to that candidate experience.
Yeah, and your hope is that obviously it's streamlining the process. I don't think anyone set out for VMS to be just glorified data entry, but in a lot of regards, that's what it does become. Whereas, like you said, what we're doing now is very much one-on-one communication. We have direct contact with hiring managers. We're able to just pick up the phone and call them. With the organizations that I was working with that were handling VMS, sometimes you would have a sourcer, a recruiter, an account manager, a team manager, and you would have those 4 steps. And then you would also have somebody who was within that line that had to enter in the VMS. So it was very tricky as to keeping candidate control, quote unquote, and making sure that everybody felt like they knew where they were at all steps of the process. Sometimes with VMS, you just don't have all the answers. And I do greatly prefer that, what we're doing now, when it comes to, not to build ourselves up for anything, but it's much better to just be able to tell a candidate, hi, I spoke with the hiring manager a couple of days ago, or hey, we haven't received an email, not, I'm at the mercy of an electronic system, and I'll let you know as soon as that spits out some information for me. That's sometimes what it is.
So to make this shifted away from us as recruiters, since our listeners are the job seekers and candidates, I would probably say it's important that when a candidate is working with a recruiting firm, to find out if their client is a VMS-based client or if the recruiting firm's client is a traditional, I guess, recruiting model. Would you say so, to help kind of set that expectation? And I think it's important for the candidate to know, we always say their resume is their identity. This is as good as putting your license out there. It's got a lot of personal information. So you would probably suggest it's good that they get a sense of what's going on with their resume on the back end.
Absolutely. And even so, when you're just getting down to the monetary piece, sometimes in a VMS system, you're locked in to what you can pay somebody. So if you're working at a place where your organization's arrangement with a client is that you can only make a certain percentage off of sending somebody over, or the people that you're sending over on a full-time basis can only make up to a certain amount, the VMS system locks that in. So say you have a stellar candidate at, you know, $2,000, $5,000 above what the top range is that you want for somebody. You're out of luck. You can't put that person in at anything but what the client has requested. So you're talking about stellar talent missing out on opportunities simply because there's no way to change a computer system. So that's absolutely why you want to know whether or not you're dealing with a VMS system, because when you're speaking with somebody over the phone who's working with a client that's based on VMS, and they say, I literally can't go higher than said dollar amount per hour, or I can't go higher than this salary per year. They may be saying that because they simply can't input that into a system. It does get that crazy sometimes. And I unfortunately think that many clients and many organizations have missed out on some of the best talent possible because they were unwilling or unable to flex just a little bit when it comes to the integrations they have.
So I have, okay, fair enough. So as an applicant, as a job seeker, what suggestions do we have in approaching the question of whether or not the recruiter or the person that they're dealing with is working with a VMS? What should they ask? How should they ask it?
So it's kind of unique. It's always going to come down to what each firm does and how they are in terms of transparency. When I'm on the phone with a candidate now with ACG Resources, I basically tell them that we use an application that's as simple as giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because that's really what we do. You know, we send over a profile and our clients can give a thumbs up, obviously meaning that they'd love to have a conversation, and then thumbs down that it may not be the best fit at this time. When you're speaking with somebody who has either indicated to you that it is a VMS system, or you've asked, hey, is this a VMS, or are you working with you know, a particular client that uses these types of tools or portals, I think it's important to ask the question, one, is that what I'm using? That way you're aware. And two, you know, when you're negotiating salary, when you are figuring out, you know, what the full job description is, and seeing what the qualifications are, ask them to send over the full job description from the VMS system. And that may be the same job description that's listed in their ATS. It may be the same job description they got from the hiring manager, but you want to make sure you have that full description as well as the corresponding number that is listed in the VMS system. Most VMS systems will assign a number for each of these roles. So for example, our current ATS right now, Bullhorn, that we use, we have our own numbers that we use within our own system. So whatever that number is, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is what the client that you're being submitted to has as the number for this particular job. So whether that's 1 through 100,000, whatever that number happens to be, you want to make sure you have that number as well, because that is what can also get you dinged from the books. If you get submitted by 2 different people for that same role, you're going to get canceled out. You don't want that. So you want to make sure that you're aware of the job description so that you can cater yourself to that job particularly. You want to make sure that you're aware of the salary range. That way, you know, to the benefit of both yourself and the recruiter, what is going to be feasible for you to get looked at and have priority on that basis. And obviously, you want to make sure that you know the number of the job that you're being submitted to. 1, so that you can keep track on your end, and 2, so that nobody submits you and you end up nullifying your chances of getting seen by someone.
So from what I'm gathering from everything you're saying, comparing it to a traditional process, if they get double represented by accident, because that happens sometimes on our end, that candidate still stands a chance. But on a VMS system, they'll be ruled out instantaneously.
They're done for that job, and sometimes, depending on the company, they're done with that company. If you get sent by 2 different vendors in a vendor management system, sometimes a company will completely rule you out because they feel like you're not keeping track of your stuff. And it may not be your fault at all. I've seen situations where people will just pull resumes. Obviously, organizations that aren't doing the legitimate thing and not doing the right thing, they will pull somebody's resume and they'll just send their information over without talking to somebody. and you'll end up getting double submitted or flagged. And then the recruiter who actually legitimately submitted you will get a warning about it, or they'll get a notification that it's been nullified. And that's why it's so important to have that number and have that email record, basically saying this was the date you were submitted on and who you were submitted by for what particular role.
So I guess for a candidate, the best thing they could do, and I know Michelle's dying to jump in on this, so I'm trying to help her out on making sure the candidates can get the best approach possible. Always ask your recruiting firm, because I think this conversation is very relevant to working with recruiters, what your relationship is like with the company and the hiring manager. I think that would probably be the best way to get the answer of, hey, I have a one-on-one relationship with them, or a personal relationship, versus, oh, I'm working through a vendor management system.
Yes, thank you, Greg. But I'm going to go deeper as a career coach.
I like it.
Will they actually divulge that information? It's fine for us to suggest to ask it, but will they? Will they actually do it if you ask them?
So that's the tricky part. It's, going to come down to a case-by-case basis of who you're dealing with. Most of the time, people will let you know whether it's a VMS system. But a lot of times when it comes to what is that relationship that you have with the hiring manager, people aren't so honest about it. So the common answer that I would always hear from people is, oh yeah, we just got somebody hired for a similar role with them a month ago or a couple of weeks ago. Or yeah, we're one of their top vendors. We're one of their top suppliers this year. That can mean nothing. When I was working a couple of organizations ago, we moved ourselves up. There were 9 vendors with one of our particular clients, and we made it a goal to get to number 1. We got to number 1 in a set of months, and it didn't matter when it came to the end of the year, because at the end of the day, our contract with them was worse off. So we weren't getting as many jobs, and not as many candidates were getting hired. You can be number 1 with a client and a supplier, and that can solely be based on the amount of people that you're putting in the system and how quickly you're doing it. That doesn't mean that you're getting people in the door and that they're staying there. That's what you want to really ask, I think, when you're trying to get that information divulged to you, is how many people do you have currently sitting there with the company, and how long have they been there? Because especially if you're looking at a temporary role or even a full-time role, how long have those people been there and how happy have they been? If they know that information, that's going to be a very positive sign. And if they don't, you may want to be a little bit more wary about who you're talking to.
Logan has broken it down. I'm speechless. I wish I knew some of this information. Greg, final thoughts?
Speechless. I mean, I never really got into the intricacies of VMS on our side. It's always been something that we shied away from.
Right.
I think when we were hiring Logan, that was one of the big things, the difference between VMS recruiting versus our form of recruiting.
Yes.
But I think it's important, as relevant as it seems to only be for recruiters. I think it's very important for candidates, because again, this is another tool, another process that candidates engage themselves in on the back end that they may not even know about. They may not know that, hey, my resume is going into a VMS system. And a lot of times there's what they call neutral, vendor neutral VMS systems, which aren't always. It's sometimes owned by another firm that could take those resumes and use them at other clients. So, you don't know necessarily all the times where your resume is going. Whereas with us, I think we really maintain control, and a lot of a good reputable recruiting firm is going to maintain control and identity of their candidate base. So I think it boils down to a candidate to make sure they're working and they're being selective with the right firms, not just going out to anyone that has an open job.
Question for both of you real quick. I have folks that ask me the question about, they're concerned about people reaching out to them that act like recruiters and are not necessarily recruiters. It made me think of this because they may ask for information, personal information on the outset. How can you make sure that whoever reaches out to an applicant is, how can I say, credible.
Okay. I mean, it's not something that I've really encountered on my side. I mean, if you take someone like us, yeah, I have my designations from American Staffing Association. We're recognized by the American Staffing Association. So you can check out things like that. Always make sure, I mean, most firms, a lot of them are going to have a website. What you'll see nowadays are a lot of people do recruiting on the side, or there'll be a recruiting firm on the side. They'll do things, you know, in addition to their full-time job, and they probably don't have a lot of processes in place. So that could be a reason why they may come across as someone who's not a real recruiter, or someone who's not, or they may be a consultant. I mean, it's really hard to, gonna be honest, it's hard to say what could you do. Unfortunately, we're not a licensed industry, and that's something that I feel we should be.
Okay, future lobbying efforts maybe one day.
We used to be at some point.
Yeah, Logan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to obviously the credibility point and just making sure that you have all your bases covered. Obviously, most of the people that you're talking to, they should be on LinkedIn. They should be on a lot of these networking sites. You know, look them up, just see what their regular interactions are. If somebody's really entrenched in the staffing world, they're going to have a decent number of connections. They're going to be posting the jobs that they do have that are relevant, and they're going to have people who are working with them at their organization, you know, who can say that they are reputable. There are things to watch out for with people who are posing as recruiters, from my experience, and using kind of the VMS portal system. So what I spoke on earlier with the last four social and the date of birth.
Yes.
No one is ever going to ask for your full social security number. And if they do not give it to them over the phone or over email. The last four is the most that somebody I've ever seen ask for from a client side. So just keep an eye out for that. Obviously, use some common sense when it comes to what people are asking for. But like I said, it's pretty easy to either ask them for some kind of verification when it comes to email, or to, you know, ask for a LinkedIn link, ask for a connection, see what they're doing. You know, when it comes down, bottom line, just be aware and ask questions to your comfortability.
Well, this was fantastic. Logan, thank you for joining Greg and I. This has been such a, oh my goodness, you've given us so much information. I'm so excited about it. Thank you, Logan. Thank you, Greg, for joining me for another show on the unseen process of recruiting. We'll be back next week, right, Greg?
We will.
All
I
right.
think we'll cover maybe resumes and LinkedIn. We'll see how that goes.
Oh,
A lot of unmatched resumes to people's LinkedIn profiles.
Oh my goodness. I can't wait. Thank you so much, Greg and Logan. Thank
My
you,
pleasure.
dear viewers and listeners. Until next week.